And now I'm going to let everybody in from the waiting room. Everybody here? Hello, I'm Alice Hutchinson, the owner of Birds Books, an independent bookstore in Bethel, Connecticut, and I'm honored to be the host of Write America. The aim of this series is to help set the country back on a correct, productive course of freedom, justice, equality, and plain human kindness. Write America is a literary series created by author Roger Rosenblatt, featuring award-winning, nationally renowned authors and new and emerging writers in readings and conversations each week about how books and art might bridge the deep divisions in our nation. Write America celebrates the quiet power of art in our lives, the unifying power of the highest uses of language. In novels, stories, essays, and poems, we recognize one another as parts of the human family, one family. Roger Rosenblatt, the creator of Write America, puts it this way: writing makes justice desirable, evil intelligible, grief endurable, and love possible. So with that, I welcome you, and please join us every Monday evening at this time as many of the most beloved and distinguished writers in the country read from their works and talk to each other and with you in an effort to bring us together. If you missed our last episode with Gregory Pardlow and Nick Flynn, you can go to Birds Books Write America page and link to the episode easily. I've already put that in the chat for you. Tonight's episode is also being recorded, so if you missed something, you can go back and rewatch. Tonight begins our hosting of all of our episodes on Zoom. I am building a Write America YouTube channel where they will reside. All the earlier episodes 1 through 32 are there already, and we will place this one there while I continue to move the rest over. Tonight's Birds Books hosts readings by and conversations with Fred Newman and Tony Earley. I will return at the end after the readings and discussion to bring your questions and comments to the authors. During the episode, please feel free to make comments or ask questions in the chat. We do ask that you remain muted, however. Our first speaker is Fred Newman. Fred Newman is an American actor, comedian, composer, vocal SFX artist, and former talk show host. Newman was an actor and sound effects artist on Garrison Keillor's live radio variety show, A Prairie Home Companion. In an audience favorite feature of the program, Keillor tells an apparently impromptu story that is funny because it requires Newman to strain to supply rapid-fire sound effects for unusual occurrences and obscure animals. Newman was featured in an interview with Jane Pauley on CBS Sunday Morning, and the segment was nominated for an Emmy. He has also done character voices and sound effects in numerous film, television, and video game credits, including Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Doug as Skeeter Valentine, Porkchop, Mr. Dink, and other characters, and Harry and the Hendersons, Gremlins, Munchies, Storybook World, Elmo's World, and is a special guest on episode Mouths of Wolfmen in Black. Please welcome to the screen, Fred Newman. Let me grab you here, Fred.
Thank you. Thank you. But I can't accept that beloved and distinguished. That doesn't sit easily on my shoulders there. Did you ever see the devil, Uncle Joe? Uncle Joe, did you ever see the devil, Uncle Joe? Did you ever see the devil, Uncle Joe? Uncle Joe, don't mind the weather, so the wind don't blow. Up up with the ladies, up up with the ladies, up up with the ladies. Don't mind the weather, so the wind don't blow. That's a Thai jaw harp. Now, I heard a lot of jaw harps when I was a kid, one of which I'm going to tell you a little story. I'm not going to read something because I actually want to get into oral storytelling versus writing, and especially with Southern writers. That's what I'm going to get into. And I want to tell you this little story. It's a hot summer day in Georgia, and it's August. Every afternoon in Georgia, it will monsoon about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the air from the Gulf comes up the Chattahoochee Valley, which is really dividing line between Alabama and Georgia. And we're sitting there right on this line, and it had just monsooned, and it's hot. It's like the inside of someone's mouth. Well, there's this little kid sitting in a cold, cool pile of sand, and he's just sitting there, and there's a corrugated roof above his head of steel that the rain had just made a thunderous sound on top of, and he's sitting there in this sand, looking out at water dripping off the edge of this corrugated roof. Beside him is this old black man named Snipes. Snipes. And I should tell you that kid there with the elastic pants on is about 5 or 6 years old, and that's me. Freckle face, snaggletooth, big old bubble head. I was called Bubba Head by my cousins. And I'm sitting there saying, Snipes is beside me. Old black man, I'd ask him many times, how old are you, Snipes? And he said, I was 90 years old 10 years ago. Or sometimes he'd say, 10 years ago, I was 90 years old. He would make up things, but he said, you calculate that. He wore overalls. And when I was really young, my mom and dad would let me go down to the family construction company into the nail yard. And I would walk around there. And that was a lumber yard. And there were all sorts of things that are very dangerous. And Snipes would let me hold on to his hammer loop on his overalls. Now, Snipes wore a fedora hat. He had a face that looked like a National Geographic map. Very, very dark black. He had these piercing eyes and a gray whiskers. And he was sitting there eating a tomato sandwich, sitting in the cool sand with me. And he'd eaten a bite of sandwich and said, Fred, you ever watch the water drop? I said, no, sir. He said, watch it come down. And I did. And I watched it was going bloop, bloop, bloop. Interesting, because I was right at the eye level. I use a scientific word. The meniscus of the water was just right at my eye level, and I could see the water above the barrel, just a little curve of it. Meniscus is that little thing on your that's also called a meniscus, a little curve. That curve right there, the water would go down, and I watched it would drop like this. And he said, it don't look like a drop, does it? I looked at it and I saw it, and it was like, looked more like like a bullet. It would go down and it would blow a hole in the water. It'd go like this. The hole would open up, air would go down. It's like a balloon thing, this way, like this. And then it would start closing up and the air would go up. He said, watch that, watch what happens. And I saw that, and he said, that's a bloop, bloop, whoop, bloop, whoop, bloop, whoop, 2 different sounds. He said, you can make that sound. I can make that sound. Yeah, you can make that sound. What you do? Tap on your cheek. You can just try this at home. Now you got to breathe through your mouth. Breathe through your nose, like that. So you make your mouth into a cup. He's telling me this. And I go. He said, and then you're going to push the water. Open your mouth up like you're saying an O. Tap real gently, and then you push the water out. And he leaned towards me and he went. I've done that better, but I could not believe it. He showed me that sound, and he could make all sorts of sounds. It changed my life. I went online at that particular moment just to hear him describe that sound. And I would follow him anywhere. He would, the one other thing that he did is that he was not like any other adult. He would get on my eye level to tell me stories. So I'd look at him eye to eye. And when he would get so close, I could feel the heat of his face. If you're a Southern kid, you probably know how to do that because it was just all over. Mostly males, but females too. That's what I grew up with. And that got me into listening. It got me into storytelling. It got me telling story. And people would do that. And they would say things like, well, I feel pretty good considering. And then I learned to say, tell me about that considering. They said, oh, I got into it yesterday. And they'd tell stories. The reason I'm very excited to be sitting here, not as a reputable writer. And I have written several books and I've done a lot of short stories and lots of things, but mine is an oral tradition. But Tony Earley, oh, that's a writer. Southern writers, you can hear from the cadence, you can hear from the way they describe things that they're just from down the street. And it's this mix that I am really appreciating as I get older, of black and white stories that are just sort of merged together. The cadence and the glide and diphthong. My son, he raised in New York City. He's in his early 30s now. And when he tells a story, last time I heard him tell a story, when he tells a story, he has this much of a Southern accent, because you can say, oh, she opened the door and slowly went inside. And that cadence, that swing, that's all there. That's what I grew up with. And the difficulty for me is taking a story, and this is what I'd love to talk to Tony about, taking a story that's an oral story and putting it into written word where it's frozen. So every time I tell a story, I'm reliving that story. I was just back on that sand pile. I have to relive that story. Now, when I was older, 16 years old, I was at that same Newman construction company. I was down there, I was working there, and I just got my driver's license. And Snipes was in the front seat, and he told me this truck, and he told me some stories and stuff. And I said, "Is that true?" And he said, "There's more truth in a made-up story than there ever was in a fact." Isn't that the truth? That I would, yeah, and that's what it's all about right now. We're fighting over stories, and religions are stories. Trump's a story that's unfolding. That all that's going on, but the truth, there's more truth in a made-up story than there ever was in a fact. Oh, so that's where I'm coming from. I don't know where my time is now, but I love that part of it. The other part is that I'm dyslexic. I grew up, I didn't know that until I went to University of Georgia, and a psych professor said, "Come in, let me give you some tests." And I give him some presentation where I sort of process in lumps, not necessarily linearly. And I didn't really learn to read until 4th grade. When I heard that Tony was coming on, I said, "Oh, I got to go back and read some of his books." I loved his books. And what happened, I've got some eye thing issues that I couldn't read. So I found that he had recorded his books. Oh, so I went back and listened to Somehow Form a Family. It's an amazing book. So I got questions for him, but I was back about present tense. That's what I'm jumping around. That the thing about sound is that it makes you present tense. It orders things for you. Light does not. Reading is forever, and you can read it, but you can read your own speed and so forth. But sound orders stuff. That was the way I got through stuff. I would memorize things by singing them, and so all the sounds I do, I've learned by just stopping and listening. Oh, probably 5 to 10 times a day. Just stop and listen to the energy around me. All right, I think I'm winding this up now. That means winding it up so Alice can come back in. It feels like I've talked enough.
Well, thank you so much. We'll catch you on the other side.
Mhm.
Our next speaker is Tony Earley. Tony Earley is the author of 5 books. Here We Are in Paradise, a collection of stories, the novels Jim the Boy and the Blue Star, and the personal essay collection Somehow Form a Family. His most recent book, Mr. Tall, a novella and stories, was a finalist for the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Prize. A winner of a National Magazine Award for Fiction, he was named one of the 20 best writers of his generation by both Granta in 1996 and The New Yorker in 1999. His fiction and or nonfiction have appeared in Harper's, Esquire, The New Yorker, The New York Times Book Review, Tin House, Best American Short Stories, News Stories from the South, and many other magazines and anthologies. He is a native of Rutherford County, North Carolina, and a graduate of Warren Wilson College and the University of Alabama. He lives in Nashville with his wife and daughters, where he is the Samuel Milton Fleming Professor of English at Vanderbilt University. Please welcome to the screen, Tony Earley. Let me snag you here, Tony. Let me get away.
Hi, Alice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And, I'm really happy to be here, although I'm not particularly happy at this moment to follow somebody who had a jaw harp with them when they came on stage. I've read occasionally with a North Carolina writer named Clyde Edgerton, and Clyde always begins by playing the banjo, which I just think is totally unfair, and I've resented him for years, and now I resent Fred as well. I thought I'm going to read the opening of a story tonight called Place of Safety. Something that's kind of always annoyed me about poetry readings is when the poets gloss the poems before they read them. But I'm going to gloss this story a little bit. It's a story that's had its genesis in the killing of my neighbor, who was one of my closest friends, by an ex-boyfriend. But the neighbor's not in the story, nor is there a murder, but the emotional genesis was the death of my neighbor. And spoiler alert, the story's got a tornado in it. I worked on the story for 9 months. It was a story, then it was a novel, then it was a story again. And I finished it on March the 2nd, 2020 at about 6 p.m. And 6 hours later, a tornado destroyed a large part of my neighborhood, including my roof. So it turns out that I have dark powers that I didn't know about, and I wasted them conjuring a tornado. Anyway, this is the opening of Place of Safety. For years, people asked Rochelle, "What were you thinking?" Everybody wanted to know. Strangers would cross the street to cut her off on the sidewalk. "Hey," they would say, "tell me one thing." She'd put the girls down after lunch and tried to catch a nap herself. But every time she started to doze off, the sirens. You'd think they'd blow the sirens only after somebody had actually seen a tornado, but no, they'd been going off all morning. She didn't know how the girls slept through it. They were almost out of milk. They only had enough for 1 cup, and both girls would want it. The IGA was just up the street. You could almost see it from the house. There and back, 5 minutes flat, 10 tops if somebody in line had a cart full. The girls were sleeping so peacefully. She locked the door and shook the handle and stuck her fingers in her ears and ran for the car. It was tornado weather. Too hot, too humid, too still. The air singed with ozone. Low black clouds boiling by, a movie running too fast, but not a breath of air stirring on the ground. Streetlights on at lunchtime. But it was Alabama in April. When was it not tornado weather? At the IGA, the parking lot was empty. Mr. Chandaluri was holding the door open. Rochelle pulled her fingers out of her ears and yanked the chain on her brightest smile. Her mama always said, "Smile whenever somebody does something nice for you." Then they'll want to do it again. But the sirens, the wailing chopped through her head and circled away and came back around and chopped through her head again. It was hard to keep looking pleasant. Come inside, he said. She said, why, thank you, Mr. Chandaluri. In, he said, now. That's when she saw the keys hanging from the door. She stopped. Why was Mr. Chandaluri trying to lock her inside the IGA? She said, we ran out of milk. He said, look, and pointed across the parking lot. A hive of queasy green cloud hunkered over downtown. As they watched, a crooked finger of smoke wobbled to the ground and began to scratch among the buildings. A flock of sheep flushed from the roof of the insurance office and spun away into the air. A telephone pole leaned slowly forward, an old man picking up a penny off the floor, the wires pulling tight before toppling over with a white flash and a boom. The lights in the IGA went off, the street lights, the sirens. Mr. Chandaluri grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her into the store. Run, he said, aisle 1, straight back, the freezer. She heard keys jangling, the thunk of the lock, her flip-flops slapping the floor. A glow, a window, a door, a broom handle, slice of light across a tar black room, the freezer, the cold Mrs. Chandaluri squatting on the floor with a flashlight. Emil, she asked. He's right behind me, Rochelle said. And then Mr. Chandaluri was kneeling beside Mrs. Chandaluri. Oh, mother, he said, it's coming. Mrs. Chandaluri pointed the flashlight at Rochelle. Mrs. Taggart, she said, where are your babies? Tina woke up first. She made sure Tanya was still asleep, then tiptoed out of the room and ran down the hallway and climbed into bed with her mother. Rochelle said, you can stay here as long as your sister doesn't wake up. Tina thought, don't wake up, and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, Rochelle was gone. She wandered down the hallway to the kitchen and around the island into the living room. She circled the coffee table and went back through the kitchen and opened the basement door crack to see whether the light was on downstairs and pushed it closed again. She peeked inside the bathroom. She looked behind the shower curtain. She went back to Rochelle's room and checked the closet and under the bed. When she poked Tanya on the shoulder, Tanya frowned without opening her eyes and said, don't wake me up. Tina said, Mommy's not here. They searched Rochelle's bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. Tanya cracked open the basement door and closed it again. In the living room, they looked out the picture window. The street lights were on. Tanya said, her car's gone. Where did she go? Tina asked. Dogs all over town were howling along with the sirens. Tanya said, we should turn on the TV. They sat down on the rug and Tanya aimed the remote at the television. Dave Diamond looked straight at them and said, Dana, Alabama, you're under the gun. If you can see me, if you can hear the sound of my voice, you should already be in your place of safety. If you have a basement, get in it right now. Run, kitchen, basement door, down the rickety stairs, dark and damp and dirt and tide. Tanya jumped and finally the light cord. Tina spun around and around beneath the bulb because what were they supposed to do in the basement? Tanya pointed at the narrow space between the washer and dryer and said, let's hide in there. Tina said, I don't want to hide in there. Good spiders and bad spiders lived in the basement and she couldn't tell them apart. Both kinds definitely lived under the washer and dryer. Tanya said, but it's a tornado. Tina wasn't sure what a tornado was, but she thought it had something to do with the train. She said, I want mommy. Tanya sat down and grabbed Tina's arm and tugged her to the floor. Tina said, stop. Tanya scooted back into the gap and said, we have to get in. Tina said, no, but scooted backward until she bumped up against Tanya's feet. She said, I'm telling. The light went out. A ghost floated down the street and turned into a lion. The lion jumped on the roof of the house and roared and clawed at the shingles and broke out the windows. It picked up the house and looked underneath it and sucked in her breath and roared so loudly that Tina felt her hair lifting away from her head. She saw daylight, mud and leaves and grass. Tanya screamed in her ear. Tina thought, put it back down, and covered her head with her arms. So I will stop there.
Gentlemen, it's all yours.
So Fred, I gather you're from lower Alabama or lower or Georgia? Where exactly?
Getting some breakups there. Say that once again.
So what part of Alabama are you from? Or is it-
I'm actually from Georgia. We look down on Alabama, where we are from. I'm from LaGrange, Georgia. LaGrange, south of Atlanta, about 60 miles.
I had a student from LaGrange, a kid named, well, he's not a kid anymore, named Taylor Bruce. Wonderful.
Taylor Bruce, that's a familiar name. Another Bruce's, sure. My family knows his family. Yeah. That story, my goodness, what a piece of writing. That's what I'm talking about. That's the series of declarative sentences that are so straight, honed, and pure is just extraordinary to me. I tend to ramble, and you just lay it out so succinctly.
I do love a declarative sentence. And sometimes I think I should learn how to write another kind of sentence because I'm afraid that the thing I write sounds the same. But anyway, I don't know how to write any other kind of sentence.
It gets the job done, and you like a big influence on me was Mark Twain said to get the adjectives are the evil of writing, or something to that effect. That you just described it so beautifully, and but I can hear I do hear the Southern. What a powerful story. That was how recent for you? When did you write that?
2020.
Oh, okay.
You know, everybody had the pandemic, but we had a tornado right before the pandemic. So spring of 2020 was a lot of fun in Nashville.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
The reason I ask about where we're from is that, do you think that there's sort of an umbrella storytelling, or do you think there are regional variations within the region? I've always kind of bristled a little bit at the phrase Southern writer, just because it's so broad, and I'm not sure that we all fit inside the same barrel.
No, I'm with you on that. I definitely agree. I am so not well read there because of dyslexia. I read very specifically, and people will rave about something. I'll go, okay, I'll get through it. It is very regional. I think what in my older age, and I just hit 70, my older age is really looking back at the Black-white influence, where the two languages have gone together, and storytelling of Africa really influenced the Scotch-Irish in that area of Piedmont that I'm in. And that's what I tend to, well, that's where Brer Rabbit stories came from. And Joel Chandler Harris, being the stuttering newsman journalist that he was, he recorded him as best he could. Now, that's not in favor now, and I understand that for all the reasons. But there was and the story I was telling you happened, I would say 1958. I was about 6 years old at the time. So much of my understanding of storytelling goes there. Tennessee, North Carolina, my mother's family from North Carolina, and there is it's a tighter form of mine. I think was more African influenced, but it was more Scotch Irish, and there were more independent people up that way. What do you think? What tell me?
I think that's true. I'm from the mountains of North Carolina, and which was mostly settled by ill-tempered people who didn't get along with anybody anywhere else.
Yeah,
And
get that.
they wandered across the southern United States and they found the most unarable ground that they could find and said, I'll stop here. So I think that's, but I certainly grew up in a storytelling tradition. The earliest human speech that I knew were people sitting around a table telling stories at my grandparents' house. And everybody was a storyteller except my grandmother, who thought it was her job to correct everybody else's stories because we were telling stories and she wanted to hear the truth. But it was the kind of table that if you stopped and you took a breath that was too long, somebody else would start their own story. So once you got up, you had to keep going, or you would lose your place. And it would be hard to get a word in edgewise.
Well, you bring up something that I was told how to tell stories. I didn't know that. When my Presbyterian father would say, "What did you do today?" At the table, we were all met at 6 o'clock, and everything else we scatter but every night at 6 o'clock we would have dinner. And what did you do today? What happened at school? Wait a minute, who are you talking to? And she was who? And so he's telling me I need this information for the story, and that was that conversational part of it. I tried to perform the stories like stand-up comedy. That's not going to happen. But here's an interesting thing, and I'd love to hear what you think about it. Jokes are told in present tense. Man walks into a bar. He sees it. That stories were told in past tense. And I loved being in New York. I'd come back down, and Jewish storytelling was present tense. Yesterday, I'm walking down the street. I see this guy. He says to me, so it's like this present tense. When I would go back to Georgia, I love the present tense because I would tell a lot of my stories in present tense. They would go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Is this a story or a joke? If I told it in present tense. Now, do you find that the present tense versus past tense?
I'd never thought about that, but yeah, I mean, jokes tend to be present tense, and I don't know.
Now, I have this theory. The reason for that is that we had Yiddish comedians that dominated radio and television. And so it was that present tenseness. They didn't know past tense. They could just get by. So they're, it is the man who walks down the street. He sees this guy, says to him. So I don't know. I wondered if that's something. Have you written in present tense? Do you do the gerundic version of things?
Never more than half a page. And pretty much what I tell my students is about present tenses. Don't try this at home. I think it's tremendously hard to get it right. It's such an artificial way of storytelling, because generally that's not the way that we tell stories. And so overcoming the artifice has a whole different level of difficulty to writing in present tense. And I tell my students not to do that. The students who are going to be writers don't pay attention to me anyway. And they go ahead and do what they want. And so I don't worry about being that prescriptive, because the good kids, they come into class who they are and they leave who they are. So yeah, I don't worry about it too much.
I went back, and I mentioned earlier that I went back to I was going to read, and I realized I could not read for about 8 months. I have not been able to look at screens very much. I couldn't read very, very short things. I couldn't keep it in my head because of an eye thing. But somehow, Form a Family, it felt like the series of essays was over some time where the writing actually changed. Was that a pivotal time for you? What was going on? When was that? And when that it was very, it felt like, a love, extraordinary observation about your family and revelation about your family and your childhood and growing up. And then it started moving, and midway in the book, you did a tear on metaphors that completely, I had to stop. I had to go, oh my gosh, there was a whole, because I think that goes back to Snipes. There's more truth in a metaphor than, well, he said, made up story than there ever was in fact. You did that in the middle of it, and the whole book changed. Is that significant of any sort for you?
I'm not, I'm certainly not conscious of that, but
Okay.
I think probably what changed was that I got married during. So one writer started the book out, and another writer finished it. That was a collection of personal essays, and I swore off the personal essay right after that because my family was furious at these pieces. And my mother actually wanted me to write a disclaimer. She actually wrote it down and gave it to me to put into the book. That said, Tony Earley's mother would like you to know that his childhood was not as bad as this book says. And then my father wanted to buy the entire print run, and then found out that he couldn't afford that. And so that came out in 2001. That's the last personal essay I ever wrote, and probably going to be the last one that I ever write. It was just, it was just too nasty.
That's so interesting. It was really interesting to me to go join Garrison Keillor on Prairie Home Companion, and Garrison was ahead of me in the sense of he does tell stories in past tense, but he is very improvisational, and he's the one that said to me, "You don't like following a script, do you?" And I went, "No, not really." He said, because he wrote everything, and he would write the sound effects in and so forth. And he said, "Well, why don't we just not have so many scripts?" I said, "Great, let's do that." And we started, that's when it changed. When Alice referred to that, it's interesting you did that, Alice, in the intro, because that was a pivotal moment for us as together. I was with him about 17 years and still doing shows with him. We're doing some this fall. That notion of making it up in the spot. Do you improv your writing, or do you just sit down and grind it out? How do you physically do your writing, and what's your thought process in that?
I do write orally. It's all about the sound. And in my experience, when something sounds right, it means right. Those two things tend to arrive at the same time. But as far as just walking around in life telling stories, which I do constantly, I revise those every time I tell them, and they get tighter and tighter, and sometimes wander away from what actually happened, because oftentimes truth is not nearly as interesting as story truth. And sometimes a student will write a story, and the class will say, "I don't believe that this happened," and I'll say, "Wait a minute, that has the unmistakable stench of truth." But I do constantly revise the stories that I tell, and I tell them over and over again, and my wife's very patient with that, but it absolutely drives my daughters crazy. And I'll start a story at the dinner table, and one of them will say, "Heard it."
Yeah, that part of storytelling, where have you been reading in the Times? It's like Science Times this year. There's been some research about how one recalls memory, where memory is way more complex. It's not in one place in the brain. It has to be reconstructed every time you think of that story. You will think of it different because you're thinking now. You're thinking with your brain now, not then. So you embellish and change it. What you really have pulled through that is the truth of it that you want to get out. And I found that like completely enlightening, but and that's based on parts of the brain that they're doing with imaging and so forth. That I love to hear that you're doing that. That's what I do. every time it's a new story. I got to relive it again when I tell it. And yeah.
I think, memory is, physiologically, whatever that is. But as soon as you recount it, it's a story. I don't, human life can't exist without narrative. And so when somebody says, "What'd you do today?" and I went to the store. Well, I went to the store is a story.
Yeah. And later with the shopping cart with the wheel that's going. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, I totally agree. But that's the part of that I love, is the observational part, where then do you look at something that happened at the grocery store or in the car, whatever, and the stories come to you then, like you yes and what actually happened, like I'll rewrite what happened in that.
Well, there's two kinds. I mean, I might come home and say, I saw this lady at the grocery store and the wheel was, and I won't even try the noise. But in writing, just sort of everything goes into a bowl, and I'm never quite sure what will later come out of the bowl or how long it will be before it comes out of the bowl. And I'm always surprised by that. Something that happened today that I didn't pay that much attention to 10 years from now might be crucial in a story.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm not sure how any of this works, which is a little disconcerting, because if I don't know how it works, how do I know I'll be able to get it to work again? But so far so good. The stories keep falling out.
A question: do you I just lost the question. That's the way my mind works. The iteration, the jazz of it is what I'm so much in the present tense. I'm trying to dictate writing, because you can so easily, even on your phone. I'm using it, but it's still not the same as, do you ever dictate? Do you ever put ideas down?
No, it's all typing all the time, and I'm way too meticulous for writing to be any fun, and I write sentences over and over and over, and I worked on the book I'm working on all summer, and I didn't get off of page 127. I was on page 127 the entire summer. Now, page 1 through 126 are really clean, but I'm so such a,
on that. Tell me, does it feel like your writing it nudges up into poetry, where the nuance of the word, like, sometimes I'll like grab the air, I go, oh, that's such a good, a simple, you did the scratchy finger of the tornado. What was that?
That was pretty good, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, it killed me. It's like, wow.
I was really happy with that one. So
because it had every connotation that you wanted. Oh, that was fantastic. Yeah. But how did that hit you? Do you remember when that hit you? Was it a rewrite of any sort, or just out of the blue? Of what?
I don't remember. That's just, again, I don't understand the way that it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like I cheat though all the time, and I'm happy to cheat, because I can read a story and someone else is this brilliant. I don't steal that, but if it's a really good story or a really good song or really good, I get ideas from it. What do you expose yourself to before writing? What do you do to get the ether right for you to put words together?
Well, I procrastinate as long as possible. I steal too, but hopefully not in a way that anybody will notice. But usually just a piece of good writing makes me excited. Mm-hmm. And that excitement will make me want to go out to my office and try to write something. That's the best part about teaching, for me, is that just to see a student is kind of got that wild-eyed, crazed look that beginning writers have, and not just sort of picking up some of that energy and taking it out to my office. That's a big help.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I can see that. Do you stop during the day? Do you stop and listen? I'm saying that because I actually stop 4, 5, 6 times a day and just stop and listen to what's around me. And it's very meditative. I'm not meditative. I also nap a lot. Do you nap a lot?
Most of my writing time consists of self-loathing with with sporadic bouts of typing. That's sort of the way that it works for me. And
Really, you still feel like you're lost in the woods, and but you do know you're going to find your way out, right? Mostly, yeah.
Not well, it's
No.
just it's sort of in the grand scheme of things, yeah. But just day to day, no. Every day I will crawl into the house and say, "Oh, Sarah, I don't know how to do this. It's terrible," and blah blah, And one time she turned to me and said, "Do you know that you say this every single day?"
Yeah,
So,
don't get me started on my house. No,
I try not to say it anymore, but no, that's and again, it's not digging dishes or working in a factory, but it's certainly, it's not always easy or fun.
No. Well, I think what I've done is adjust the goalpost, and Garrison's pretty good. He was said, well, as long as it's pretty good, and I'm like, okay. Sometimes I have to settle for pretty good, and people will give you if they know you and they know, okay, occasionally you're really good, they'll give you credit for trying, but you seem to have higher standards where you really do want it so close to poetry that it's a finger of the tornado. Like
I don't. Yeah, no. I wish I could settle for pretty good, because I just
no,
yeah, I can't.
no, but you got standards. I admire that. I'm just kind of like, okay, I'll slide here. No, I do have some standards, but yeah. Any particular ways you get inspiration that that you do with some regularity?
Okay. Again, nothing that I can identify and repeat. Just everything in life goes into the bowl, and eventually a voice or a sentence will come out of the bowl. And I don't know what ejects that one little piece that becomes a story, but something always gets ejected out of the bowl, and then there's the beginning of the story. But no, in terms of, is there anything that I can do that will make that happen? No, I don't. I wish that I did know. I wish that I knew how I could go through the bowl and find stuff. But the bowl is the bowl, and it sort of does whatever it is.
The bowl. Now, but I notice you have cards or post-it notes or these beside you to your right over there. Is that a system of some sort?
That's page 127 right there.
Dang, that's the one. That's the bad boy right now.
This is all the stuff that has happened so far, and on the bottom, this is the stuff that might happen that I'm not sure about.
And those are nooks and crannies and meanderings, and that like sidebar stories or character things. What would they be?
But,
you don't have to tell me if you don't want to.
No. I mean, it's just writing is kind of like watching a movie, and the movie can go any one of 100 different ways. And so I've watched all these movies and eventually pick one out and write them down on those things.
Yeah, I do the little.
Alice, are you looking for us?
I just thought I'd ask one of the audience questions for you because it applies to both of you. Eric Coble asks, why is it that everyone in all regions of America want to hear stories from the South? We don't feel that way about any other region. This is from an inveterate Northeasterner.
You know, I don't know, but in a bad thing. Uh, it's, I mean, I love that that's true, but also there's something that condescending isn't the right word, but there's sort of an expectation of a performative thing, and there's a certain kind of having a drawl and chewing up the scenery that I think some people expect, and I kind of push back against that. But I've often wondered that, and writers from the South will get Southern writer tucked in front of writer, and no other region of the country gets that adjective.
Well, then the follow-up question really is, I mean, I was born in the South, raised in the North, but had all my family in the South. So I spent a lot of time there. And there is a difference in the literature. Are you saying that there isn't or shouldn't be? I mean,
Well, I don't.
the voice sounds different to me.
No, I think that there's a greater variation as there is in the literature from any other part of the country. I mean, you know, just William Faulkner springs to mind. He's a Southern writer, and theoretically, I'm a Southern writer, and we have absolutely nothing in common. We don't fit in the same box in any way, but you know, we get put into the same box. Anyway,
I heard your pushback on the Southern writer, and I'm processing that. I do find, just as a a pretty slow reader, that there's a cadence. And I know when I've been edited by writers, by editors from the North, they'll say, you don't need that word. I said, no, it's not for the word. It's because it needs one more beat in the sentence. It's just, there's a rhythm in it that I think is common to some of the Southern writing. I think Southern writing, you're right. It's just applied to a bunch of stuff, and it's over applied. I didn't mean to offend you by that.
Oh, no. But if I kind of hate to see an adjective in front of the word, in front of the writer. But if I had to choose an adjective for myself, I would choose Appalachian and not Southern.
Oh, that's interesting. And the Flatlanders are very different than the Appalachian and the mountain people. Not only is the accent different, but there's a pragmatism that's really firmer, and it's not gentility, it's more statusy kind of things that are happening in the flatlands, and I think that still exists. And it's one of the reasons I left there. Now, most of my life has been.
I'm sorry to interrupt. It might be just sort of the class implications that I'm objecting to.
I think that's it. Yeah.
My background, they're Irish and poor, and the phrase is talking about the planter class and the elite down the mountains. The old phrase is, I don't have a dog in that fight.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a whole different set of interests. What's gotten kind of weird for me is that I'm no longer a member of the class that produced me, and so that's kind of weird, because I have to be really careful to not sound fake. So I'm not sure who my people are anymore.
That class part, I think, is really. I grew up very statusy, Georgia. I didn't understand it until I got away from there, and not until I went to England for a couple of years did I realize, oh, that's what that is down there in that part where the Piedmont area. Yeah.
No, I get a bad table in a restaurant, and I think I immediately go class. Well, they didn't like my accent. That's why I got the bad table, which is ridiculous. Sometimes you just get a bad table, but I immediately go class to that question.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Well, I'm going to follow up with a very different question. Have either of you been on any kind of either literary or just pilgrimage Where have you been in doing the research for your work that you would want to share with us that's interesting or different? And I'm sure that you all have traveled to places that I know I haven't been.
Yeah,
Where have you been?
uh, because I am oral, that everywhere I go, I'm always listening to the accents. And if I hear someone say something, do you mind me asking a question about so and so? I will interrupt conversations. A casual vacation. I'm up here in Massachusetts right now, and I haven't been out where I've circulated, but grocery stores everywhere. I am always there because I'm picking up. I will find someone with a. They're talking among themselves, but I want to hear how they're telling whatever they're telling, and I will follow them and listen to them all the time. But not any. I lived in Finland for a while. I lived in the first thing I want to do is get out of Georgia and listen to other stuff. And I went to Finland and all up there and England for a couple of years. I learned a lot about the roots of Georgia, but I think it's just constant with me. I think writers have to always be listening when they're out there, just picking up stuff in the
But any
ether.
place in particular where you saw something that was so entirely different? Or can you even start?
Well, let me think of a particular moment. It I guess because I'm such a listener, it's the energy, the sound of wherever they are is so different because of the environment. The accent is a product of, anywhere you go in the world, the accent in a city is faster, more clipped and harsher than the country around it. And I don't care if you're in Paris and then you go to out in the country, you'll hear, that they drop the ends of words in Paris, but not out of the country. That all that part. So I'm always, and I've noticed it in New York. I notice it here in Massachusetts. I notice all that. So I'm not really answering your question like some. Well, I got one. Ireland is unbelievable. Scotland's great for storytellers, but Irish, they'll stop you on the street and just tell you a story. And that I cannot, and I just come out of there just like reeling. We've taken the family there several times because it's just so much. And they come over here, let me tell you a story. And they just, so that's me. I'm going on too long. Sorry.
No, not at all. Tony, where have you been? We want to know,
The only-
inquiring minds.
I mean, I write stories about Nashville and I write stories about a very small place in Western North Carolina. So as far as to needing to do research, I don't need to do research. I just sit around and make stuff up. The only literary pilgrimage I've ever made was to Faulkner's house. And I went after a girlfriend and broke up with me. And I went to Oxford, Mississippi and wandered around Oxford and looked at Faulkner's house and thought about myself in third person. But this is a rock from Faulkner's yard.
Oh,
I love that.
Don't tell anybody.
I won't tell.
Wow.
Gentlemen, do you have anything right now that you're reading that you want to tell us what's on your nightstand? What are you reading? Or Fred, are you listening or to anything?
I'm actually, the first book that I've taken back is George Dawes Green's book about Kingdoms of Savannah. And I've become more than an acquaintance, but I've known him over the last a couple of years, and I've always known him through The Moth. But that is a really, he's got a great hold on language and a push of a story that I'm really enjoying. That's my favorite right now.
I'm reading my way through the Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall trilogy. I just finished the second one, Bring Up the Bodies. And I kind of been on a Tudor kick and I've been on it for a while. And it was, ironic, it turns out in those books, they're just queens dying all over the place. But I started them before we lost Queen Elizabeth.
Oh.
Wow.
Well, gentlemen, this wraps up our hour. I want to thank you both. I'm going to mute you so that I can say my goodbyes and remove the spotlights on both of you. I'd like to thank Fred and Tony for participating in Right America this evening, and to each one of you who turned in tonight. And thank you to Roger Rosenblatt for creating this original and important series to look forward to each Monday evening. Tonight's episode is the perfect example of the purpose and mission of Right America. We hope to see you next week on Monday, September 19th at 7, as we welcome Edvich Junta and Richard Rabinowitz. Please remember to check out Bird's Book's Right America page at the top of this chat, where you can find out information on our upcoming episodes and maybe purchase a book or two. Thank you very much, folks.